The blood on the snow was still fresh. Silas Crenshaw stood motionless at the edge of the ravine, his breath forming white clouds that dissolved into the frozen February air. Below him, perhaps 30 feet down through a jagged maze of rock and ice, a trail of crimson carved its way through the pristine white like a wound that refused to close. The blood was bright against the snow, impossibly red, the kind of red that spoke of violence and desperation, and something terrible that had happened not long ago. He had been checking his trap lines when he first noticed it, a smear of color against the endless white, too bright, too deliberate to be from any animal he knew. Mountain lions did not bleed like this. Wolves did not leave trails so desperate, so unmistakably human. Something had fallen here, or been pushed, and whatever it was had fought against gravity and stone all the way down. Silas was 38 years old, though the mountain winters had carved decades into his face. His beard hung thick and gray, streaked against his chest, and his eyes, once the clear blue of summer sky, had faded to something harder. Something that had seen too much and chosen to forget. The lines around those eyes told stories he never spoke aloud. Stories of loss and vengeance, and the terrible things a man could do when everything he loved was taken from him. For 4 years he had lived alone in these mountains. 4 years since he buried Clara and their unborn child in the meadow behind their cabin. 4 years since he tracked down the 3 men who set the fire that killed them and delivered justice that no court would ever sanction. 4 years of silence, of solitude, of a grief so heavy it had become indistinguishable from the weight of his own bones. He should walk away. Every instinct he had cultivated in his years of isolation screamed at him to turn back toward his cabin, to pretend he had seen nothing. Whatever lay at the bottom of that ravine was not his concern. He had learned the hard way that caring for others only led to loss, that love was simply another word for eventual devastation. The mountains had taught him that survival meant staying apart, staying alone, staying numb to everything that might remind him of what he had lost. But his feet would not move. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound so faint he might have imagined it. A moan, human, female. The sound was weak, barely distinguishable from the whisper of wind through the pines, but it cut through Silas's carefully constructed walls like a blade through parchment. He closed his eyes. He saw Clara then, as he always did in moments like this. Her dark hair spread across the pillow in the morning light, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, feeling their child kick against her palm. Her smile that could warm even the coldest Wyoming night, the smile that had made him believe, for a brief and precious time, that happiness was something a man like him could hold on to. She had been 8 months pregnant when she died. 8 months of hope and planning and dreams of the future, all reduced to ash and memory in a single terrible night. He had not been there to save her. He had been checking his trap lines just like today, doing the ordinary work of an ordinary day while his entire world burned to the ground. His hands were already reaching for the rope coiled at his belt. The descent was treacherous beyond anything Silas had attempted in years. Ice clung to every handhold, slick and treacherous beneath his calloused fingers. Loose stones shifted beneath his moccasins with each careful step, threatening to send him tumbling after whoever had fallen before him. The rope helped, but only barely. Every few feet he had to stop and find new anchor points, testing each hold before committing his weight. Halfway down, he paused to catch his breath and look at what waited below. The blood trail was clearer from this angle, a crimson path that wound between boulders and frozen earth, before ending at a dark shape sprawled against the rocks at the bottom. From here, he could see it was definitely a person. From here, he could see that the person was not moving. Silas moved with the practiced grace of a man who had spent decades navigating terrain that would kill lesser men. His body remembered paths his conscious mind had long abandoned, finding purchase where none seemed possible, avoiding the loose stones that would betray him. The cold bit at his exposed skin, numbing his fingers and making the final yards of descent an exercise in pure determination. When he reached the bottom, the reality of what lay before him struck him like a physical blow to the chest. A woman, young, perhaps 25 or 26 years old, though it was hard to tell with her face pale as the snow around her and twisted in unconscious pain. Her dress, once fine-quality calico and deep burgundy, was torn and soaked through with blood and melted snow. The fabric had been expensive once, the kind of dress a woman might wear to church or to meet important people, but now it was ruined beyond repair. Dark brown hair spread across the white ground like spilled ink, matted with blood from a gash on her temple that still seeped red despite the cold. Her face, even twisted in pain, held a delicate beauty that seemed impossibly fragile against the brutal landscape around her. But it was her belly that made Silas's throat constrict, and his heart stopped beating for one terrible moment. She was pregnant, 8 months, perhaps more. The swell of life beneath her ruined dress was unmistakable, straining against the fabric with a fullness that spoke of imminent arrival. A baby, a child about to be born, just like the child Clara had carried, just like the child who had died with her in the flames. Silas knelt beside the woman, his knees sinking into the bloody snow. With hands that trembled despite his efforts to steady them, he pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for the flutter of life beneath her cold skin. A pulse, weak and thready, barely there at all, but present, alive. She was alive. His other hand moved instinctively to her belly, pressing gently through the layers of fabric and flesh. He held his breath, waiting, hoping, dreading what he might or might not feel. And then it came. A kick, strong and insistent against his palm, a tiny foot or fist protesting the violence that had been done to its mother. The baby was alive too, fighting to survive despite impossible odds. Silas heard himself make a sound, something between a gasp and a prayer. Memories crashed through the walls he had built around them, flooding his mind with images he had tried so hard to forget. Clara in their bed, her hand guiding his to feel their child move for the first time. The wonder in her eyes, the joy in her voice as she described what it felt like to carry new life inside her. The promises he had made about the life they would build together, the home they would create, the family they would become. Promises he had failed to keep. Not this time. The words formed in his mind with a clarity that surprised him. He did not speak them aloud, but they settled into his bones like a vow, like a sacred oath sworn on the graves of everyone he had lost. He would save this woman and her child. He would not fail them the way he had failed Clara. Whatever it took, whatever it cost him, he would give them the chance at life that his own family had been denied. He moved quickly then, assessing her injuries with hands that remembered skills he thought he had forgotten. The gash on her temple was deep, perhaps 3 inches long, running from her hairline toward her ear. It would need stitches, and soon before infection could set in. Head wounds bled heavily, and this one had already soaked her hair and stained the snow around her. If she had lost much more blood, no amount of skill would save her. Her right leg was bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. A compound fracture, the bone displaced beneath the skin, though mercifully not piercing through. The leg was swelling already, the flesh around the break turning dark with trapped blood. If he did not set it properly, if he did not get the bone back into alignment before the swelling made it impossible, she would lose the leg. Or worse, infection would set in, and she would lose her life. There were other injuries too, he could tell. Bruises forming on her arms and shoulders where she had tried to protect herself during the fall. Scrapes on her hands from grasping at rocks and roots on the way down. But these were minor compared to the head wound and the broken leg. These would heal on their own if she survived long enough for healing to begin. The woman moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. Silas leaned close to her ear, his voice barely above a whisper, trying to reach whatever part of her consciousness still remained. Safe. Just the one word. He did not know if she heard him or understood, could not tell if his voice penetrated the fog of pain and blood loss that held her. But he needed to say it, needed to make the promise, even if only to himself. Setting the bone would cause agony. There was no way around it, no way to soften what had to be done. Silas positioned himself carefully, one hand gripping her calf just above the ankle, the other bracing her thigh above the break. He could feel the wrongness of the bone beneath his fingers, the way it had shifted out of alignment, the grinding edge where the two halves no longer met. He took a breath, then another, steadying himself for what he had to do. In one swift, brutal motion, he pulled the bone back into alignment. The woman's scream tore through the mountain silence like something being killed. Her eyes flew open, wild and unseeing, her back arching against the snow as agony ripped through her unconscious body. For one terrible moment she was fully awake, fully aware of the pain, her mouth open in a wordless cry that echoed off the ravine walls. Then, just as suddenly, her body went limp. Her eyes rolled back, consciousness fleeing from suffering too great to bear. She slumped against the bloody snow, breathing but insensible, her face even paler than before. Silas did not allow himself relief or guilt. There was no time for either. The bone was set now, but it needed to be stabilized before he could move her. And he had to move her soon, before hypothermia claimed what the fall had failed to take. He fashioned a splint from branches he tore from a nearby pine, stripping the smaller twigs and needles until he had two straight pieces, roughly the length of her lower leg. He bound them tight against her leg with strips of leather from his hunting pouch, immobilizing the break as best he could with the limited materials available. The makeshift brace would hold until he could get her somewhere warm, somewhere he could work properly with real tools and supplies, which meant moving her. Now. Silas looked up at the ravine wall he had just descended, calculating angles and distances. Carrying her up was impossible. The climb had nearly killed him when he was unencumbered, when he had both hands free and only his own weight to manage. With an unconscious pregnant woman in his arms, they would both die before reaching the top. He would have to find another way. The ravine continued north, narrowing in places, but eventually opening onto a gentler slope that would allow him to climb out. It would add miles to the journey back to his cabin, miles they might not have, but it was the only option that did not end with both of them dead at the bottom of these rocks. First, though, he needed something to carry her on. It took him nearly an hour to fashion the travois. Two pine saplings stripped of their branches, lashed together with leather straps in a triangular frame that could be dragged behind him like the sleds he had seen native peoples use in the deeper wilderness. The work was slow and frustrating, his cold fingers fumbling with knots that should have been simple, but eventually the frame took shape. He lined it with his spare buckskin shirt, creating a cushion for her battered body. Lifting her onto the frame was its own kind of torture. She weighed less than she should have, less than a woman carrying a child ought to weigh. Malnourished perhaps from months of hard travel, or simply worn down by whatever circumstances had led her to this frozen ravine. Her body felt fragile in his arms, breakable, like a bird with hollow bones. He arranged her carefully on the travois, immobilizing her broken leg with additional bindings, cushioning her head with a fold of leather. Then he stripped off his heavy bear fur coat, the one that had kept him alive through 4 Wyoming winters, and tucked it around her despite knowing he would regret the cold. She needed it more than he did. The baby needed it more than he did. The journey began. The first mile was the worst. The travois caught on every rock and root, jerking the woman's body in ways that made Silas wince, even though she remained unconscious. Every obstacle required him to stop, to lift the frame over or around, to check that she was still breathing, that the baby was still moving. The work was exhausting, burning through reserves of strength he had not known he still possessed. Snow began to fall halfway through the journey, thick and heavy, the kind of snow that meant a storm was building in the mountains above. The flakes came down faster and faster, filling in his tracks almost as quickly as he made them, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. The temperature dropped with the snow, turning his exposed skin numb, then painful, then numb again. Silas did not allow himself to think about the miles still ahead. He did not allow himself to wonder who this woman was or how she had ended up at the bottom of a ravine with a broken leg and a baby in her belly. He did not allow himself to imagine what would happen if she died despite his efforts, if he failed again the way he had failed Clara. He simply moved forward, one foot in front of the other, dragging her through a landscape that seemed determined to kill them both. 3 times he stopped to check her breathing, pressing his ear to her chest to hear the faint rhythm of her heart. Each time, he also checked her belly, feeling for the baby's movement. Each time the child kicked against his palm, fierce and insistent, refusing to surrender to the cold and the darkness. The storm grew worse, Wind howled through the trees, driving snow horizontally into his face, making each step a battle against the elements. His arms burned with the effort of pulling the travois. His legs trembled with exhaustion. His lungs ached from breathing the frozen air. But he did not stop, could not stop, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing. And failing was not something Silas Crenshaw could allow himself to do. Not this time. Not when he had been given a second chance to save what he could not save before. By the time his cabin came into view, a squat structure of hand-hewn logs nestled against the mountainside, Silas could barely feel his hands or feet. His body moved by memory alone, following paths worn deep by 4 years of solitary existence, carrying him the final 100 yards to the door he had built with his own 2 hands, the door that had never opened to welcome anyone but himself, until now. He kicked it open and dragged the travois inside, gratitude flooding through him at the sight of the fire he had banked that morning. The cabin was cold but not freezing, the embers in the stone fireplace still glowing a dull red. Heat, shelter, safety, or at least the possibility of it. Silas left the woman on the travois while he built up the fire, adding kindling and larger logs until flames leapt and crackled, filling the single room with dancing light and blessed warmth. The heat seeped into his frozen limbs, bringing with it the pain of returning sensation, pins and needles racing along his fingers and toes. Only when the fire burned steady and strong did he turn his full attention to his patient. He lifted her carefully from the travois frame and carried her to the bed, the only bed. A sturdy frame he had built from pine, covered with furs he had trapped and tanned himself over 4 solitary winters. He laid her down gently, arranging her injured leg with care, elevating her head with folded blankets to help with the bleeding that had finally begun to slow. Then he set to work. Water first. He filled his largest pot from the barrel by the door and set it over the fire to heat. While he waited, he gathered supplies from the chest where he kept his medical kit. Clean cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. A needle and thread, the kind he used for leather repair, but sterilized now in the flames of the fire. Whiskey, precious and irreplaceable this far from any settlement. Dried herbs he had gathered during warmer months and preserved for emergencies. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain and fever, comfrey root for bone healing. When the water reached temperature, Silas began cleaning the head wound. He worked slowly, carefully, washing away the dried blood that matted her hair, examining the gash beneath his steady fingers. The wound was deep but clean, no debris or fragments embedded in the flesh. It would heal well if he stitched it properly and kept it free from infection. The needle pierced her skin, and she moaned softly but did not wake. Silas worked methodically, placing each stitch with precision born of necessity. He had performed this task before, on himself more times than he could count, on wounded animals, on a trapper friend who had been mauled by a bear years ago. But this felt different. This felt like it mattered more than anything he had done in 4 long years. 7 stitches later, the wound was closed. Silas washed it again with whiskey, ignoring her whimpers of pain, knowing the alcohol was necessary to fight off the infection that could kill her as surely as the fall itself. Then he applied a poultice of yarrow and honey, binding it in place with clean cloth wrapped carefully around her head. Next came the leg. The splint he had made in the ravine had served its purpose, but it was too rough, too temporary for the long healing process ahead. He carved new splints from seasoned pine boards, working by firelight, smoothing each one until no edge remained that might chafe her skin or cause unnecessary pain. Then carefully, methodically, he removed the old splint and replaced it with the new one, binding it tight with strips of clean leather. The woman's breathing changed as he worked, becoming faster and shallower. She was close to waking, close to feeling the full force of the pain that waited for her. Silas reached for the willow bark tea he had prepared, strong enough to dull the agony, but not so strong as to harm the baby she carried. He lifted her head gently, pressing the cup to her lips. Drink. Her lips parted reflexively, and he poured a small amount into her mouth. She swallowed without waking, her body responding to his care even as her mind remained lost in unconsciousness. He gave her more, waiting patiently between each sip until she had consumed half the cup. Then he settled back, watching her breathe, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, watching for any sign of distress from the life she carried within her. Hours passed. The fire burned steadily, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the storm reached its full fury, wind screaming around the corners of the building, snow piling higher against the door. But inside, warmth held the cold at bay, and two lives hung in the balance, tended by a man who had learned too well the cost of absence, the price of arriving too late. Silas sat in his chair by the hearth, rifle across his lap, watching the woman sleep. He should have been exhausted. He should have been thinking about food, about rest, about the days of recovery that lay ahead for both of them. But all he could think about was the cradle in the corner. He had built it 3 years ago in the cabin he had shared with Clara, in those final precious weeks before everything burned. He had spent hours selecting the perfect wood, sanding each piece until it was smooth as silk, carving small flowers into the headboard because Clara loved flowers. She had watched him work, her hand resting on her belly, her smile brighter than any fire. After the flames took her, after he had buried what remained of his wife and unborn child, after he had tracked down and killed the 3 men responsible, Silas had returned to find the cradle miraculously intact among the ashes. Everything else was gone, reduced to charred timber and bitter memory. But the cradle had survived, as if waiting for him, as if refusing to let him forget. He had brought it with him when he fled into these mountains. He had set it up in this new cabin, this isolated sanctuary where no one would find him, where no one would ask questions about his past or his pain. And for 4 years it had sat empty in the corner, a monument to what might have been, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Silas stood and walked to the cradle now, his footsteps silent on the plank floor. Inside, still folded carefully where he had placed it 4 years ago, lay the small blue blanket Clara had knitted, her hands working the needles in the firelight, her smile as she imagined wrapping their child in this very fabric. He lifted the blanket, holding it to his face, breathing in a scent that existed only in his memory now. The yarn was soft against his weathered skin, still perfect despite the years, still waiting for a child to warm. Then he looked at the woman in his bed, at the swell of her belly, at the new life fighting to be born despite impossible odds. He walked to the bedside and tucked the blue blanket gently around her shoulders. It seemed right somehow. A blanket made with love for a child who never came, now warming a child who still had a chance. Clara would have wanted this. Clara would have insisted on it, would have taken this stranger into their home without hesitation, would have given everything she had to help another mother, another baby survive. I will not fail this time. The words were barely audible, even to his own ears. But they were a promise, a sacred oath spoken to the ghosts of his past and the uncertain hope of his future. He had failed Clara. He had failed their child. But he would not fail this woman and her baby. Whatever it took, whatever it cost him, he would give them the chance at life that his own family had been denied. Outside, the storm raged with full fury. Wind screamed around the cabin walls and snow piled higher with each passing hour. But inside, the fire burned steady and warm, and Silas Crenshaw kept his vigil over 2 strangers who had stumbled into his carefully constructed solitude. He did not know their names. He did not know their stories. He did not know if they would survive the night. But for the first time in 4 years, he found himself caring about the answer. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thing of all. She woke on the 3rd day. Silas was dozing in his chair, the rifle still across his lap from the long nights of watching, when he heard the sharp intake of breath that meant consciousness returning. He was on his feet instantly, years of wilderness living having trained him to wake fully alert at the slightest unusual sound. He moved to the bedside but kept his distance, understanding instinctively that a woman waking in a stranger's cabin would feel fear before anything else. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their dark depths as she struggled to make sense of her surroundings. She stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, rough-hewn logs fitted together with careful precision. Her gaze traveled to the walls, to the stone fireplace with its crackling fire, to the sparse furniture and hanging furs that spoke of a solitary existence in the wilderness. Then her eyes found Silas, and terror sparked immediate and raw in their depths. She tried to sit up, gasping as her broken leg protested the movement with a wave of agony. Her hands flew to her belly, that protective gesture so instinctive it required no thought, just the primal need to shield the life she carried from whatever threat this strange man might represent. Easy. Silas held up his hands, showing they were empty, showing he held no weapon, posed no threat. His voice came out rough from disuse, rusty after 3 days of silence, broken only by murmured reassurances to an unconscious patient. "You are safe. No one will hurt you here." The woman stared at him, her breathing ragged, her dark eyes cataloging every detail of his appearance. He knew what she saw when she looked at him. A mountain man, wild and weathered, his beard hanging thick and untrimmed against his chest. Hair too long, clothes made of animal hides, the kind of rough appearance that civilized people feared and avoided. He looked like the villains in cautionary tales, the monsters parents warned their children about. "Where am I?" Her voice cracked on the words, dry and weak from 3 days without proper use. But beneath the weakness he could hear intelligence, education, the careful diction of someone who had been taught to speak properly. "My cabin, up in the Wind River Range of Wyoming Territory, about as far from anywhere as you can get." He kept his voice low and steady, trying to project calm, trying to show her he meant no harm. "I found you at the bottom of a ravine 3 days ago. You were badly hurt, broken leg, head wound, nearly frozen. I brought you here and tended your injuries." 3 days. She repeated the words as if trying to make sense of them, as if 3 days was an impossible span of time to have lost. Her hands moved over her belly, feeling, searching, and he saw the terror in her eyes intensify. "The child, my baby. Is the baby strong?" Silas spoke quickly, offering the reassurance he knew she needed more than anything else. Strong heartbeat, plenty of movement. "I have checked throughout, every few hours. Your baby is alive and fighting just as hard as you are." Relief washed across her features, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed both hands against the swell of her belly, feeling for herself the movement he had described. When the baby kicked against her palm, she let out a sob that was equal parts joy and terror and exhaustion. Silas waited. He did not try to comfort her with words or touch. He simply stood witness to her grief and her gratitude, understanding that sometimes a person needed space to feel what they were feeling without interference. The mountains had taught him patience, if nothing else. When her tears finally slowed, she looked at him again. Some of the terror had faded from her eyes, replaced by cautious assessment. She was measuring him now, trying to determine what kind of man he was, whether she could trust him, whether she was truly safe or merely in a different kind of danger. "Who are you?" "My name is Silas. Silas Crenshaw." "Just Silas? No title? No profession?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth despite everything. "I suppose you could call me a trapper, though I have not traded furs in years. These days I mostly keep to myself." She absorbed this information, her intelligent eyes missing nothing about him or the cabin around them. "Why did you help me?" The question hung in the air between them, simple words that demanded a complicated answer. Silas could have given the easy response. "Because you needed help. Because I could not leave you there to die. Because it was the right thing to do." All of those were true, but none of them were the whole truth. Something about this woman, about the directness of her gaze despite her vulnerability, called for a different kind of honesty. "I had a wife once." His voice came out rougher than he intended, the words dragging against the walls he had built around them. "She was 8 months pregnant when she died. I was not there to save her. So when I found you, broken and bleeding, carrying a child of your own—" He paused, searching for words adequate to explain what he barely understood himself. "I suppose I saw a chance to do what I could not do before. A chance to save someone this time, instead of being too late." The woman's expression softened. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared pain, the understanding of one wounded soul seeing another. "What is your name?" She was quiet for a moment, as if testing whether the name still belonged to her after everything she had endured. "Rosalind. Rosalind Mercer." "Rosalind." Silas tested the name, finding it suited her somehow, elegant but strong, like wildflowers that survived the harshest winters, like the delicate things that proved themselves tougher than they appeared. You need rest, Rosalind Mercer. Your leg is badly broken. You have a concussion from the head wound, and your baby needs you to be strong. How did I come to be in that ravine? Her voice had steadied, though her face clouded with memory as she asked the question. I do not remember anything after. She trailed off, and Silas saw the moment when remembering became too much, when the memories pressed too close and threatened to overwhelm her. You do not need to talk about it now. Rest first. There will be time for stories later. But Rosalind shook her head, her jaw setting with a determination that surprised him given her weakened state. No, I need to say it. I need someone to know the truth, in case. She did not finish the sentence, but Silas understood. In case she died, in case the baby did not survive, in case no one ever learned what had really happened to her in that frozen ravine. He pulled his chair closer to the bed and sat down, giving her his full attention. Tell me. Rosalind took a breath, then another, steadying herself for what came next. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than before, as if telling the story gave her power over it instead of the other way around. My husband died 4 months ago, Tobias Mercer. We were married 3 years. He was a good man, kind and patient, the sort of man who noticed when others were struggling and did what he could to help. He wanted to be a farmer, to build something lasting for our children, to leave the world better than he found it. She paused, her hand moving unconsciously over her belly. But he got sick. Consumption. It came on slowly at first, just a cough that would not go away, just a tiredness that rest did not fix. Then the blood started. By the end, every breath was agony for him. He could not eat, could not sleep, could not do anything but lie in bed and suffer while I watched helplessly. Silas knew consumption. He had seen it take trappers in the mountains, watched strong men wither to nothing over months of helpless decline. There was no cure, no treatment, nothing but waiting for the inevitable end while trying to ease the suffering along the way. He asked me to help him. Rosalind's voice dropped to barely a whisper, the words so heavy they seemed to sink into the silence between them. Every day for a month, he begged me to end his suffering. He said he could not bear it anymore. He said watching me watch him die was worse than the disease itself. He said if I loved him, truly loved him, I would give him the peace that nothing else could provide. She looked at Silas directly, her eyes bright with unshed tears but steady, refusing to look away from the truth of what she had done. I gave him laudanum, enough to let him slip away peacefully. It was what he wanted, what he asked for every single day for 4 weeks. The only mercy I could offer the man I loved. And someone saw you. Yes. The word came out broken, cracked with grief and guilt and anger. His father, Walter Mercer. He came to visit and saw me with the empty bottle. He saw Tobias's body, still warm, and he believes I murdered his son for the land claim, for the 320 acres in Oregon Territory that Tobias had filed for. Silas felt the pieces clicking into place in his mind. A grieving father, a daughter-in-law he suspected of murder, and somewhere along the line, violence that had led to a pregnant woman lying broken at the bottom of a ravine. He pushed you. Rosalind nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. We were traveling west. Walter said he would accompany me to Oregon. That family takes care of family. That he wanted to ensure I arrived safely. But he was watching me the whole time, judging me, waiting for something. And one night, when a storm came, and the trail narrowed along a cliff edge, she shuddered, the memory clearly still raw. He said I did not deserve to live after what I had done. He said the land belonged to his family, not to a murderer. And then he pushed me and my baby into the darkness and left us to die. Silence settled over the cabin, heavy with the weight of betrayal and survival. The fire crackled in the hearth. Wind moaned against the walls outside. But between Silas and Rosalind, something had shifted. He thought about what she had told him. A woman who had loved her husband enough to help him die with dignity. A father so consumed by grief that he convinced himself his son had been murdered for property. A land claim worth killing for, and an innocent woman who had nearly paid for it with her life. He thought about his own past, about the fire that took Clara, about the 3 men he had hunted down and killed in the months that followed, about the blood on his hands that would never wash clean, no matter how many years passed, no matter how many times he tried to scrub it away. He thought about his brother Henry, about the secret he had never told anyone, the truth so terrible he had buried it deeper than any grave. "Then I am glad I found you." He said it simply without elaboration, but he meant every word. Rosalind looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the rough exterior to something deeper, something that recognized her pain because it matched his own. "So am I." She whispered the words, and something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it, the foundation on which trust might someday be built. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Silas would wake before dawn and build up the fire, adding logs to chase away the cold that crept in during the night. He would prepare simple meals of cornmeal mush or dried meat and broth, the kind of food that would help Rosalind regain the strength she had lost. Then he would help her sit up, propping pillows behind her back, bringing her food and water with a carefulness that spoke of practice and patience. After breakfast came the medical care. Silas would change her bandages, checking the head wound for any sign of infection, examining her splinted leg to ensure the bone was healing properly. Rosalind bore these examinations with quiet dignity, though he could see the pain in her eyes whenever he had to manipulate the broken limb. Then Silas would go about his daily work, checking trap lines when the weather allowed, chopping wood to keep the fire burning through the long mountain nights, hunting when opportunity presented itself. The storm that had arrived the night he brought Rosalind home had settled into a pattern of intermittent snow and bitter cold, the kind of weather that signaled winter's true arrival in the high mountains. Rosalind spent her days reading from the small collection of books Silas owned. She worked her way through Byron and Shelley, Emerson and Thoreau, her educated mind hungry for the stimulation that words provided. She mended clothing with supplies he offered, her careful stitches speaking of years of practice and skill. And she watched him work, her dark eyes following his movements with an attention he found both unsettling and oddly comforting. They talked more as days became weeks. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, as the enforced intimacy of cabin life broke down the walls between them, layer by careful layer. Silas learned that Rosalind had been a school teacher before marrying Tobias, that she loved poetry and music, that she had dreamed of seeing the Pacific Ocean since she was a girl reading about it in books, that she could quote Shakespeare from memory and had once won a spelling competition that drew contestants from 3 counties. Her mind was quick and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked and why. Rosalind learned that Silas had considered becoming a doctor before choosing the freedom of the mountains, that he could play the fiddle hanging on the wall, though he had not touched the instrument in 4 years, that he secretly enjoyed poetry despite his rough exterior, and that he had built every piece of furniture in the cabin with his own 2 hands. She learned that beneath the wild appearance was a man of intelligence and sensitivity, a man who had retreated from the world not because he could not handle it, but because the world had hurt him too deeply to bear. They learned each other, layer by careful layer, and with each passing day, the connection between them deepened into something neither had expected. But Silas kept his secrets, the darkest ones, the ones he could not speak aloud even to himself, until the night Rosalind found them. It happened on the 14th day after her arrival. Silas had gone to check his nearest trap line, a 2-hour journey he could not postpone any longer. The furs were his only source of trade goods, and he needed to check the traps before predators found the catches and ruined them. He left Rosalind with strict instructions. Stay in bed. Keep the fire burning. Do not try to walk on that leg. She promised, but Rosalind had always been curious. It was what had made her a good teacher, this need to understand everything around her, to uncover the truths that hid beneath the surface of things. And 14 days confined to bed, with nothing but books and her own thoughts for company, had made her restless in ways she could no longer ignore. An hour after Silas left, she used the crutch he had fashioned for her and began to explore the cabin. It was not a large space. One main room with fireplace, bed, table, and chairs. A small loft above for storage, accessible by a ladder she could not climb with her injured leg. A root cellar below for keeping food cool, its trapdoor set into the floor near the storage area. But everywhere she looked, she found evidence of the man Silas Crenshaw had been before he retreated to this mountain solitude. Books arranged by author on shelves he had built himself, the wood sanded smooth and fitted together with obvious care. Tools hanging on pegs he had carved, each one worn smooth by years of use. Furs he had trapped and tanned, soft and perfectly cured. A fiddle with a slightly cracked body hanging on the wall like a memorial to music that was no longer played. And beneath the bed, partially hidden by a hanging fur, a wooden box. Rosalind knew she should not. She knew it was a violation of trust, of the unspoken agreement that governed their unusual living arrangement. This man had saved her life, had tended her wounds for 2 weeks, had shared his food and shelter without asking anything in return. Going through his private possessions was wrong, but her hand was already reaching, already pulling the box out into the light. It was locked. A simple mechanism, not particularly strong, but enough to discourage casual investigation. She almost stopped then, almost pushed the box back under the bed and returned to her place. Then she noticed the key hanging on a nail behind a book on the shelf, almost as if Silas wanted it to be found. Or perhaps he simply believed no one would ever come looking, that his isolation was protection enough. Her hands trembled as she fitted the key into the lock and turned it. Inside, Rosalind found pieces of a life interrupted, a daguerreotype photograph, carefully preserved in a small frame. Silas, younger and clean-shaven, stood beside a pretty woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. The woman's hand rested on her pregnant belly, and the love between them was visible even in the faded image. They were standing in front of a cabin, not this one, but built in the same style, with mountains rising in the background. Clara. Rosalind whispered the name, recognizing the woman from the careful way Silas spoke about his dead wife, the tenderness in his voice whenever he mentioned her. There was a wedding ring beneath the photograph, simple gold, size for a small feminine hand, a baby bonnet in white linen with delicate embroidery, clearly never worn, still perfect despite the years, a lock of dark hair tied with a faded ribbon, newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, about land disputes in the territory, and a wanted poster. Rosalind's breath caught as she read the words printed in bold black letters. Silas Crenshaw, wanted for triple murder, reward $500. Her hands shook as she held the poster, reading the description beneath the headline. 3 men killed over the course of 2 months, shot, stabbed, beaten, brutal deaths delivered with what the poster called cold-blooded determination. She set the poster aside with trembling fingers. Beneath it lay one final item, a letter. Sealed, addressed to Silas in careful feminine handwriting. Never opened. Rosalind stared at it for a long moment. This was different from the other items. This was not a keepsake or a memento. This was something unfinished, something Silas had carried for years without allowing himself to face. She did not open it. Some boundaries even her curiosity would not cross. Instead, she returned the letter to the box along with everything else. She closed the lid, replaced the key on its nail, pushed the box back beneath the bed. Then she returned to her chair by the fire to wait for Silas to come home. She did not hear the door open an hour later, did not hear Silas enter, stamping snow from his boots. Did not know he was there until his voice, cold and hard, cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" Rosalind looked up, her face carefully composed but unable to hide the knowledge in her eyes. Silas stood in the doorway, snow on his shoulders, a dead rabbit in one hand. His face was a mask of betrayal and anger, and something else beneath it. Something that looked like fear. Silas. I found the box. I should not have looked, but I did. You went through my things. Through my wife's things. Yes. She did not try to lie, did not try to minimize what she had done. I know it was wrong, but I needed to understand who you are. What kind of man saves a stranger's life and asks nothing in return? Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, his movements sharp with barely contained emotion. He pulled the box from beneath the bed and opened it, checking each item, ensuring nothing had been taken or damaged. You had no right. I know. These are all I have left of her. I know. Silas carefully replaced each item, closing the lid with deliberate slowness. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. Then why? Because I am carrying a child into an uncertain future. Because I need to know if I can trust the man who holds my life in his hands. Because I have already been betrayed by someone I trusted, and I cannot afford to be wrong again. Rosalind met his eyes without flinching. You are wanted for murder, Silas. Triple murder. $500 reward. That is not something a person ignores. For a long moment, Silas simply stared at her. Then slowly the anger drained from his face, replaced by something older and sadder. 3 men who killed my wife and unborn child. His voice was flat, stripped of all emotion. They set fire to our cabin. Clara was inside. She tried to escape, but the fire was too fast. I found what was left of her in the ashes when I came home from checking my trap lines. Just like today. Just like the day I found you. He sat down heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. I tracked them down. Took me 2 months, but I found each one of them, and I killed them. Shot the first while he slept. Knifed the second in an alley behind a saloon. The third? He paused and something dark passed across his face. The third I beat to death with my bare hands. Took a long time. He begged me to stop, but I did not. Could not. Not after what he had done. Rosalind listened without interrupting. When he fell silent, she asked the question that had been forming since she first saw the careful way he had folded the wanted poster, separate from everything else. One of them was someone you knew. Was he not? Someone close to you. Silas went very still. How did you know? The poster was folded differently than the rest, hidden beneath everything else, as if you could not bear to look at it, but could not throw it away either. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, wind moaned around the cabin corners. His name was Henry. Silas finally spoke, the words seeming to cost him everything he had. Henry Crenshaw, my younger brother. Rosalind felt the air leave her lungs. He owed money, gambling debts to dangerous men. He knew about our land claim, knew the cabin was worth something if Clara and I were gone. So he made a deal with 2 other men. They would burn us out, scare us away, take the property and sell it to pay what he owed. Silas's hands curled into fists on his knees. They did not know Clara was inside, or maybe they did not care. Henry always was good at convincing himself that the bad things he did were not really his fault, that circumstances forced his hand. But when I found him, when I confronted him about what he had done, he looked at Rosalind, his eyes haunted by memories that would never fade. He laughed. He told me she was just a woman, that I could find another. He said I was making too much of what he called an unfortunate accident, as if Clara's life, our baby's life, meant nothing at all. So you killed him. I killed him, beat my own brother to death while he begged for mercy I did not have to give. And I have spent 4 years wondering if that makes me a monster. If the violence I carry inside me is what truly caused everything I lost. Rosalind was quiet for a long moment. Then she struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her leg, reaching for her crutch. Silas did not move to help her, too lost in his own confession to register her movement. She crossed the small space between them until she stood before him. Then carefully, she reached out and touched his face. Her hand was gentle against his bearded cheek. You are not a monster. Her voice was soft but certain. You are a man who loved his wife and child, a man who was betrayed by someone who should have protected you, a man who delivered justice when no one else would. She held his gaze. I gave my husband mercy when he begged for death. You gave your wife vengeance when she could not ask for it. We both made impossible choices out of love. That does not make us monsters. It makes us human. Silas's face crumpled. Something behind his eyes broke open. A wall he had maintained for 4 years, finally cracking under the weight of shared understanding. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. The first tears he had allowed himself since the day he buried what remained of Clara and their child. Rosalind pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him despite the awkwardness of her crutch, despite the impropriety of the moment. She held him while he wept, absorbing his grief, offering her presence as the only comfort she could give. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the cabin, something had changed. A barrier had fallen, a secret had been shared, and neither of them would ever be quite the same. The riders came on the 18th day. Silas was setting snares near the cabin, working with the easy efficiency of long practice, when he first heard the horses. Three of them at least, moving slowly through the deep snow, their hoof beats muffled but distinct to ears trained by decades of wilderness living. The sound was wrong. No one came this far into the mountains in winter without serious purpose. No one ventured this deep into the wilderness unless they were looking for something specific, or someone. He did not run. Running would only confirm he had something to hide, would mark him as prey instead of predator. Instead, he straightened slowly from his work, his hands moving casually to check that his rifle was loaded, his knife secure at his belt. He positioned himself with his back to a thick stand of pines, making it impossible for anyone to flank him, and waited. The lead rider emerged from the tree line first. A big man, perhaps 45 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by an angry sculptor and then left to weather in harsh elements for decades. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer that spoke of violence survived and violence inflicted. His eyes were pale gray, cold and calculating, sweeping the landscape with the professional efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime hunting dangerous prey. Behind him rode two younger men, both heavily armed, both watching Silas with the wary attention of predators assessing competition. They fanned out slightly as they approached, covering angles, making sure no one could escape without going through at least one of them. "Good morning, friend." The lead rider's voice was surprisingly cultured, educated tones that clashed with his brutal appearance. He spoke like a man who had been something once, before whatever circumstances had led him to his current profession. Cold day to be running trap lines. Cold days are the best for it. Silas kept his own voice neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. Fur comes in thicker when the animals have to work harder to stay warm. Is that so? The rider urged his horse forward a few steps, stopping about 20 feet from where Silas stood. Close enough for conversation, far enough to draw a weapon if needed. "My name is Jedediah Stone. I am looking for a woman, name of Rosalind Mercer. She would be about 8 or 9 months pregnant by now, dark hair, traveling alone most likely. You would not happen to have seen anyone matching that description?" Silas allowed his face to show mild curiosity, the expression of a man with nothing to hide being asked a question he cannot answer. "Cannot say I have. This time of year, hardly anyone comes through these mountains. Too much snow, too few trails, too many ways to die if you do not know what you are doing. Is that right?" Stone's pale eyes moved past Silas to the cabin, visible through the trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin gray plume against the white sky. Signs of habitation, signs that someone was home. "Nice cabin you have there. Built it yourself?" "Every log. Must get lonely, living up here all by yourself." "I prefer it that way." Stone smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The scar pulled at his lip, turning the smile into something that looked more like a threat. "See, here's the thing that troubles me. I have been tracking this woman for near on 3 weeks now, following rumors and witnesses all the way from the Oregon Trail. Last solid lead, I had put her somewhere in the Wind River Range." He leaned forward in his saddle, his pale eyes fixed on Silas's face, watching for any reaction. "And this morning, about 2 miles south of here, I found something interesting. Old blood in the snow at the bottom of a ravine. Scraps of fabric that looked like they came from a woman's dress. Good quality calico in burgundy red. And tracks leading north. Tracks made by someone dragging something heavy, something the size of a person on a travois." Silas felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his face impassive through sheer force of will. Lot of people use travois in these mountains. Native peoples moving camps. Trappers hauling heavy loads. Could have been anyone. True enough. Stone nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Silas's face. "But most folks who drag a travois are going somewhere with it. They do not stop at an isolated cabin and then stay put for 2 weeks, unless they have something they do not want anyone to find." He gestured toward the cabin with one gloved hand. Mind if we have a look around? Just to satisfy my curiosity, I do mind. Silas kept his voice level, but allowed a hint of steel to enter it. This is private property. I do not take kindly to strangers making demands, no matter how politely they phrase them. We are not demanding, just asking neighborly, and I am politely declining. You are welcome to water your horses at the stream and rest a spell before heading back the way you came, but you are not setting foot inside my cabin. The three men exchanged glances. Silas could see them calculating odds, weighing options. 3 against 1, in open terrain, with rifles already in easy reach. The numbers favored them heavily. Most men in their position would have pressed the advantage, but Stone was smart enough to recognize danger when he saw it. Silas had positioned himself carefully, his back protected, his rifle ready, and something in his stance, in the cold steadiness of his gaze, suggested he was not a man who would go down easily. That would be a mistake. Silas spoke quietly when Stone's hand drifted toward his rifle. You see those windows up there? I have cleared sight lines from every one of them. Anyone tries to force their way into my property dies before they get through the door. And anyone who shoots me better be sure they finish the job. Because I promise you I will take at least one of you with me. It was a bluff. There was no one in those windows, no hidden defenders waiting to spring a trap. But Stone had no way of knowing that, and the certainty in Silas's voice was enough to give him pause. Easy now. Stone held up his hands in a gesture of peace. Nobody is looking for trouble here. We are just trying to find a missing woman, make sure she is safe. Then you can keep looking somewhere else, because there is no missing woman here. Just me and my trap lines and my preference for being left alone. Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. The horses shifted restlessly, sensing the danger in the air. Stone's companions kept their hands near their weapons, ready to draw at the slightest signal. Finally, Stone nodded slowly and gathered his reins. All right, Crenshaw, have it your way. We will move along. He started to turn his horse, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. But you should know something before we go. There is a wanted poster for you in every trading post from here to Fort Bridger. Silas Crenshaw, the Widowmaker they call you, $500 reward, dead or alive. That is a lot of money, the kind of money that makes men do things they might not otherwise consider. His pale eyes glittered with cold amusement. Now, I might be willing to overlook that poster, seeing as how we are both civilized men having a civilized conversation. But the next people who come looking might not be so understanding. And they will come, Crenshaw. Make no mistake about that. $500 draws attention, whether you want it or not. He tipped his hat in a mocking salute. You enjoy your solitude while you can. The three riders turned and disappeared back the way they had come, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the winter silence. Silas stood motionless for a long time after they were gone, waiting, listening, making sure they were truly leaving and not circling around for another approach. Only when he was certain they were gone did he turn and run for the cabin. Rosalind was standing by the window when he burst through the door, her face pale with fear. She had heard the conversation, or at least enough of it to understand the danger. I saw them from the window. I heard some of what was said. We need to leave. Silas was already moving through the cabin, pulling supplies from shelves, calculating what they could carry and what had to be left behind. Tonight, as soon as it gets dark. But where? I can barely walk. If the baby comes on the trail, then I will deliver the baby myself. Silas stopped his frantic preparations and faced her directly, taking her hands in his. Rosalind, listen to me. Stone is a professional manhunter. He knows you are here, or at least he suspects it strongly enough to come back and make sure. And when he does, he will not come alone. He will bring more men, or the law, or both. If we are still here when that happens. He did not need to finish the sentence. There is a trading post about 3 days' ride north of here. Thornton's Post. The man who runs it, Marcus Thornton, he owes me his daughter's life. I saved her years ago, found her lost in a mountain blizzard, and brought her home. He swore then that he would repay the debt however he could. He will help us. 3 days. In winter. With my leg broken. The fear in her voice was mixed with determination, the two emotions warring for dominance. If we stay, Stone comes back with reinforcements. If we run, we risk dying in the wilderness. Either way, the odds are against us. Better to die trying than to wait here for certain death. Silas met her eyes, letting her see the truth of their situation. I know you are scared. I know this seems impossible. But you survived a fall that should have killed you. You survived 3 days in the cold with a broken leg and a baby fighting to be born. You are stronger than you know, Rosalind Mercer, and I will be with you every step of the way. Rosalind stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, her jaw setting with resolve. When do we leave? Midnight. The snow will cover our tracks if we are lucky, and Stone will not expect us to move in the dark. The hours that followed blurred together in a frenzy of preparation. Silas packed everything they might need: food, water, medical supplies, blankets and furs for warmth, ammunition for his rifle and pistol. He checked and rechecked every item, knowing that forgetting something crucial could mean the difference between life and death. He built a special saddle arrangement for Rosalind, padding the seat with the softest furs he owned, creating supports for her injured leg so she could ride without putting weight on the brake. She would have to sit sideways in the saddle, her broken leg braced and immobilized, her good leg hooked over the horn for balance. It would be painful beyond imagining, but it was possible. They ate their last meal in the cabin in near silence. Outside, darkness gathered, the early winter night descending like a curtain over the mountains. Stars appeared one by one, cold and distant, indifferent to the desperate plans being made below. Silas looked around the cabin one final time. The home he had built with his own hands. The sanctuary that had sheltered him through 4 years of grief and isolation. The place where he had hidden from the world and the memories that haunted him. He was leaving it behind, perhaps forever. But when he looked at Rosalind, at the determination on her face, in the life she carried within her, he knew he was making the right choice. Some things were worth more than safety. Some things were worth the risk. It is time. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as she hobbled toward the door on her crutch. The cold hit them like a physical assault when he opened it, stealing their breath, burning their exposed skin. The horses waited in the lean-to behind the cabin, already saddled and loaded with everything they could carry. A pack mule bore the remainder of their supplies. Silas lifted Rosalind into the saddle, his heart clenching when she bit back a cry of pain. Ready? She nodded, her face pale but resolute in the moonlight. Ready. They rode out into the darkness, leaving behind the cabin that had been Silas's world for 4 years. Behind them, smoke still rose from the chimney, fire still burned in the hearth. But the life that had been lived there was already fading into memory. Ahead lay 3 days of frozen wilderness, an uncertain welcome, and the constant knowledge that somewhere behind them, Jedediah Stone was preparing to follow. The first day tested them both to the breaking point. Rosalind's legs screamed with every step the horse took, every slight shift in the saddle sending fresh waves of agony through her body. She gripped the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands, breathing through her teeth, forcing herself to focus on anything except the pain. The rhythm of the horse's movement, the cold bite of the wind on her cheeks, the occasional flutter of movement from the baby within her. Silas rode beside her constantly, watching for any sign that she could not continue. His eyes moved between her pale face and the terrain ahead, scanning for dangers, calculating distances, adjusting their route to avoid the worst of the obstacles. He had traveled these mountains for years, knew every trail and shortcut, but winter changed everything. Paths he had walked in summer were buried under feet of snow. Landmarks he had used to navigate were hidden beneath white blankets. They moved slowly, painfully, making perhaps 5 miles in the first 6 hours of travel. In good conditions, on flat ground, the horses could have covered that distance in less than an hour. But this was mountain terrain in the depths of winter, with trails buried under snow and dangers lurking around every turn. The sun rose cold and pale, providing light but little warmth. Silas stopped frequently to check on Rosalind, to give her sips of water, to make sure her leg was still properly immobilized. Each time he asked if she needed a rest, she shook her head and told him to keep going. I will rest when we are safe. Her voice was tight with pain, but her determination never wavered. By midday, they had climbed higher into the mountains, following a trail that would take them over a pass and down into the valley where Thornton's post waited. The air grew thinner, colder, harder to breathe. Ice crystals formed on their eyelashes and in the horses' manes. They stopped in a small clearing, sheltered by towering pines to rest and eat. Silas helped Rosalind dismount, catching her as her legs buckled beneath her. He carried her to a fallen log and set her down gently, wrapping extra furs around her shoulders. Here, eat. He handed her dried meat and a handful of dried berries. You need to keep your strength up, for you and the baby both. Rosalind chewed mechanically, forcing herself to swallow despite having no appetite. The baby kicked against her ribs, a reminder that she was not suffering alone, that another life depended on her will to survive. How much farther today? Another 4 hours if the weather holds. Silas scanned the sky, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. The clouds were building to the west, dark and heavy, with the promise of snow. There is a cave system I know about, a few miles ahead. Good shelter, deep enough to protect us from the wind, with a chimney formation that will let us have a fire without the smoke being visible. We can camp there tonight. Rosalind nodded, though exhaustion weighted her limbs and made even that small movement an effort. Tell me something, she said suddenly. What? Anything. Tell me about your life before, about Clara, about who you were before all this happened. Silas was quiet for a moment, staring into the distance. Why? Because I need something to think about besides the pain. Because I want to know you better than I do. Because if we die on this mountain, I want to know who I died beside. He considered her words. Then slowly he began to speak. I was born in Virginia. My father was a farmer, my mother a school teacher. They wanted me to be a doctor, sent me east to study when I was 17. I spent 2 years learning anatomy and medicine before I realized I hated being indoors all the time. He smiled slightly at the memory. My professors said I had a gift for healing, but no patience for the academic life. They were right. I left school and headed west looking for something I could not name, some freedom I had never felt before. And you found it. Eventually, I trapped for a few years, learned the mountains, learned how to survive alone. Then I met Clara. His voice softened. She was working in St. Louis, doing seamstress work to support herself after her parents died. I saw her in a general store, arguing with the shopkeeper about prices, giving him hell for what she called robbery disguised as commerce. She was magnificent, fire and grace all wrapped up together. You loved her, from the first moment I saw her. I think she knew it too, though she made me work to earn her trust. We were married 3 months later, and I spent every day after that grateful she had chosen me. He fell silent, the memories pressing too close. What happened was not your fault, Rosalind said gently. You could not have known. You could not have stopped it. My mind knows that. My heart is slower to learn. They mounted up and continued on. The afternoon brought fresh challenges. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, forcing them to travel single file along ledges that dropped away into emptiness. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses across particularly treacherous sections. Silas supporting Rosalind's weight while she hopped on her good leg, her broken one dragging uselessly behind. By late afternoon, Rosalind was feverish. Silas noticed it first as a flush in her cheeks that had nothing to do with cold, a brightness in her eyes that spoke of heat rather than determination. When he touched her forehead, the skin burned beneath his fingers. We need to stop. Keep going. Her voice was weak but stubborn. I can make it. You are burning up. The infection is coming back. Then we need to reach shelter before it gets worse. Keep going. Silas wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Stopping in the open with a sick woman in a storm building would be suicide. Their only hope was to reach the cave and get her warm, get medicine into her, fight the infection before it overwhelmed her weakened body. He pushed the horses harder, risking the treacherous footing for the sake of speed. The miles crept by with agonizing slowness. Rosalind swayed in her saddle, barely conscious, held in place only by the straps Silas had rigged to keep her from falling. The cave appeared just as the last light faded from the sky, a dark opening in a rock face, barely visible through the snow and trees, but exactly where Silas remembered it. He guided the horses inside, the sudden shelter from the wind feeling like a blessing. The cave was small but adequate, barely large enough for 2 horses and 2 people, but deep enough to hide them from any pursuit, with the chimney formation he had mentioned that would allow smoke to escape without betraying their position. Silas worked with desperate efficiency. He got Rosalind down from the horse and settled against the cave wall, wrapped in every fur and blanket they had. He built a small fire, risking the light because she needed warmth more than they needed invisibility. He boiled water and prepared medicines, the same treatments he had used when he first found her. Rosalind drifted in and out of consciousness as the fever climbed. She muttered names and fragments of sentences, pieces of memories surfacing through the delirium. Tobias, I am sorry. I had no choice. Her voice was weak, childlike. Walter, please. He begged me to do it. Every day he begged. Silas wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, trying to bring down the fever, trying to soothe her restless movements. Then she said something that made him freeze. The baby. He wants the baby, not just the land. Walter wants the baby, his grandchild, the only piece of Tobias left in the world. Her eyes opened, unfocused, but somehow seeing him. He will not stop, Silas. He will never stop. Because it is not about money or property, it is about love. Twisted, broken love. He wants to hold on to his son through the child I carry. He thinks if he has the baby, some part of Tobias will still be alive. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. That makes him more dangerous than any bounty hunter. A man who kills for money can be bought off or scared away. But a man who kills for love, a man who thinks he is saving something precious, he will follow us to the ends of the earth. Then she slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving Silas to contemplate what she had revealed. He sat with her through the long night, fighting the fever with cool cloths and willow bark tea, keeping the fire burning against the cold. Outside, wind howled past the cave entrance, driving snow before it. Inside, 2 lives hung in the balance. Silas thought about what Rosalind had said. Walter Mercer was not just a greedy man seeking property. He was a grieving father, desperate to hold on to any piece of his dead son. The baby represented the last living connection to Tobias, and Walter would stop at nothing to claim that connection. This made him far more dangerous than Silas had imagined. A man motivated by greed could be reasoned with, negotiated with, perhaps even defeated through superior force. But a man motivated by love, even love twisted into obsession, would never surrender, would never give up, would pursue them across any distance, through any hardship, until he either succeeded or died trying. Morning came gray and cold, but Rosalind's fever had broken sometime during the night. She woke weak but lucid, her eyes focusing on Silas's face with recognition and something that looked like gratitude. You stayed with me. Of course, all night. You did not sleep at all. Sleep was not important. He helped her sit up, gave her water and more willow bark tea. How do you feel? Like I have been trampled by a horse and then left in the sun to dry, but alive. Thanks to you. She touched his face with trembling fingers. You keep saving me, over and over again. We save each other. The words surprised him even as he spoke them, but they were true. She had given him something too, something he had not realized he was missing. Purpose, hope, the sense that his life might matter beyond simply surviving from one day to the next. Can you ride? I can ride. Her voice was stronger now, determination replacing weakness. We are close to Thornton's post. I will not give up now. They mounted up and rode out into the morning light. The storm had passed, leaving behind fresh powder that sparkled in the sun, but made travel difficult. The horses struggled through drifts that reached their chests in places, progress measured in yards rather than miles. But by nightfall they could see Thornton's post in the distance, a sprawling complex of log buildings surrounded by a high palisade fence, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Signs of civilization, signs of help, signs of hope. Silas guided them to a small gate at the rear of the compound, away from the main entrance where curious eyes might see and remember. He dismounted and knocked in a specific pattern. 3 sharp raps, pause, 2 more, pause, 3 again. A slot in the door slid open, revealing suspicious eyes. "State your business. Silas Crenshaw to see Marcus Thornton. Tell him I am calling in his debt." The eyes widened with recognition. The slot slammed shut. Moments later, the gate swung open. Marcus Thornton looked older than Silas remembered. 4 years had turned his hair from gray to white, carved deeper lines into his weathered face. But his eyes were still sharp, his handshake still firm, and the smile that spread across his face when he recognized Silas was genuine. "Crenshaw. I will be damned. Thought you were dead." "Not yet, though it has been a near thing once or twice." Then Marcus's eyes found Rosalind, still mounted on her horse, pale and obviously injured, wrapped in furs against the cold. "Lord above, what happened?" "Long story. Can we come in?" "Of course." Marcus stepped aside, shouting orders to his men to take care of the horses and bring supplies. Within minutes, Rosalind was being carried into the main building by 2 careful workers, with Marcus's wife Edith fussing over her like a mother hen. "Get her into the back room, the one we use for travelers, and fetch my medical kit." Edith Thornton was 50 years old, with kind eyes and capable hands that had delivered more babies and tended more wounds than anyone in the territory. She took one look at Rosalind and immediately assumed command. "How far along?" 8 months, maybe more. Silas followed as they carried Rosalind inside. "She fell off a cliff 3 weeks ago. Broken leg, head wound, and the fever came back yesterday, though it broke last night." "Infection? In the head wound?" "I treated it with yarrow and whiskey, but she has been through a lot." Edith nodded grimly. "I will take care of her. You go with Marcus. Get warm, get fed. I will call you when there is news. But she needs a woman's care right now, not a worried man hovering over her. Go." Silas hesitated, looking at Rosalind. She was barely conscious, eyes half closed, but she managed a weak smile. "Go. Mrs. Thornton knows what she is doing." Reluctantly, Silas allowed Marcus to lead him away. The trading post's main room was warm and welcoming after the frozen wilderness. Fire burning in a huge stone fireplace, lanterns casting golden light across walls lined with goods and furs. Marcus poured 2 cups of whiskey and sat down across from Silas. "Now, tell me everything." So Silas told him about finding Rosalind in the ravine, about nursing her back to health in his cabin, about Jedediah Stone and his men, about the desperate journey north through mountain snow. He left out the more personal details, the growing feelings between them, the way she had found his secrets and understood them, the way she had looked at him when he told her about Henry. Some things were too precious to share, even with an old friend. When he finished, Marcus let out a low whistle. So Walter Mercer hired Jedediah Stone to find his daughter-in-law. Either bring her back alive or bring back proof she is dead. And you, my friend, are still wanted for triple murder with a $500 price on your head. That about sums it up. Marcus studied him for a long moment, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "You love her." It was not a question. Silas started to deny it, then stopped. There was no point in lying to a man who could read him like an open book. "I do not know. Maybe. It has only been a few weeks. Time does not matter much when you are fighting to survive together." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I loved Edith 3 days after I met her. Knew I would marry her within a week. Sometimes you just know. She is carrying another man's child. So, the child will need a father, and from what you have told me, the man who sired it is dead. That makes the position vacant. She is being hunted by a man who will not stop, a man with money and connections and a grief so deep it has driven him mad." Marcus nodded slowly. "Walter Mercer. I have heard the name. Former territorial judge, retired now but still influential. The kind of man who can make things happen if he wants them badly enough. He will come." Silas said it with certainty. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but as soon as Stone reports back that he found her trail, Walter will come himself. He will not trust anyone else to bring back his grandchild. Then you need to be ready for him. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered compound. "You can stay here, both of you. Edith will help with the birthing when the time comes. She has delivered more babies than I can count. I will keep your presence quiet. Say you are just another trapper wintering over." He turned back to Silas. "But you are right. Walter will come eventually. And when he does, you will have to face him." "I know. Do you have a plan?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "I am working on one." The days that followed were the most peaceful Rosalind had known since before Tobias died. She recovered slowly under Edith's care. The infection in her head wound cleared completely. Her leg, still splinted, began to heal properly, the bone knitting together the way it should. She gained weight, eating Edith's good cooking, color returning to her cheeks, strength returning to her limbs. The trading post was quiet in winter. Few travelers braved the mountain passes until spring, and those who did were trappers and traders too focused on their own business to ask questions about the pregnant woman recovering in the back room. Silas spent his days helping Marcus around the compound, repairing fences, chopping wood, hunting when the weather allowed. It felt strange to be around other people after 4 years of solitude, strange but not unpleasant. He found himself remembering what it was like to have conversations, to share meals, to exist as part of a community rather than apart from one. In the evenings, he would sit with Rosalind in her room, playing chess on a worn board Marcus had owned for decades. Their conversations ranged from the mundane to the profound, from memories of their past to hopes for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. One night, perhaps 3 weeks after their arrival, Rosalind asked about the letter. "Have you thought about reading it?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, staring at the chessboard between them. "I think about it constantly. And I am afraid." He looked at her directly. "4 years I have carried that letter. 4 years I have told myself I was not ready. But the truth is, I do not know what I will do if Clara blames me, and I do not know what I will do if she forgives me." Rosalind moved carefully from her chair to sit beside him on the small settee. "Perhaps that is exactly why you need to read it. Not to know what Clara wanted, but to understand what you want. What you need to move forward with your life." She took his hand. "You have spent 4 years punishing yourself for surviving. Maybe it is time to stop." Silas pulled the letter from his pocket. He had started carrying it with him after they left his cabin, keeping it close as if proximity might somehow give him courage to face what it contained. "Will you stay while I read it?" "Of course." His hands trembled as he broke the seal. The paper was yellowed with age, brittle at the edges from years of being carried close to his body. But Clara's handwriting was still clear and beautiful, the careful script of a woman who had been taught penmanship as a girl and never abandoned the art. He began to read aloud. "Dearest Silas, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I am so very sorry. Not for dying, because death comes for all of us eventually, but for leaving you alone. I know you will blame yourself. I know you will think you should have been there, should have saved me, should have done something different. But my love, you cannot save everyone, not even me. I want you to know that these months with you were the happiest of my life. Every moment we shared, every smile, every touch, every quiet evening by the fire. You gave me more joy than I ever dreamed possible, and this baby, our miracle, was the proof of that joy made flesh. Whatever happens, if I do not make it and you do, please, please do not let grief destroy you. Live, Silas. Find joy again. Fall in love again. Have the family we dreamed of together. Build the life we planned, even if I cannot be there to share it with you. You have so much love to give, my darling. Do not bury it with me. I forgive you for everything, for the things you have done and the things you will do, for the guilt you will carry and the pain you will feel, for the years you will spend running from a grief that no man should have to bear alone. And I ask you, when you are ready, to forgive yourself. All my love forever. Clara P.S. I have hidden this letter in your trapping box. I knew you would find it eventually, stubborn man that you are. And when you do, remember this. The blue blanket was made for a child who needs it. If that child cannot be ours, let it belong to someone else. Let my love for our baby become your love for another. That is all I ask." Silas's voice broke on the final words. Tears streamed down his face. 4 years of grief finally finding release. The dam he had built around his heart cracked and crumbled, and everything he had been holding back came flooding out. She knew. He whispered through the tears. Clara knew exactly what I would do, how I would suffer, how I would run and hide and try to bury myself in loneliness. And she still loved me, still forgave me. Rosalind held him while he wept, her own tears falling silently. She did not try to speak, did not try to offer meaningless words of comfort. She simply held him, letting him grieve, letting him finally release the burden he had carried for so long. She wanted you to be happy, Rosalind said when his sobs finally quieted. She wanted you to live. I have not been living. Not really. I have been hiding from life, waiting to die, punishing myself for surviving when she did not. And now? Silas looked at her, this woman who had appeared in his darkness like a flame in the night. Now I want to live again, for her, for Clara, and for you. He kissed her then, gentle at first, tentative, asking permission rather than taking. But when she kissed him back, something ignited between them. Years of loneliness met months of grief, and both dissolved in the heat of that moment. When they finally parted, both were trembling. Clara was right about you, Rosalind whispered. The blanket was made for a child who needs it, and you were made to love again. That night, by firelight in a room far from the wilderness that had brought them together, they made vows to each other. No church, no witnesses, no legal documents. Just two broken people who had found each other against impossible odds, promising to face whatever came next together. Silas slipped Clara's wedding ring onto Rosalind's finger. It fit perfectly. The baby came 3 weeks later. It was a cold March night when Rosalind woke Silas with a hand on his shoulder and the words he had been waiting to hear. It is time. 8 hours of labor followed. Edith attended with calm competence, her experienced hands guiding the process, while Silas paced outside the door, more frightened than he had ever been in his life. Every cry of pain from inside the room was a knife in his chest. Every silence was worse. Marcus found him outside at dawn, splitting logs with unnecessary violence to work off the nervous energy that had no other outlet. She will be fine. You do not know that. Edith has never lost a mother or child in 30 years of midwifery. She is not going to start now. As if summoned by his words, Edith appeared in the doorway. Her face was tired but radiant with joy. Silas, come meet your daughter. My daughter. The words hit him like a physical force. Rosalind is asking for you. Silas walked into the room on legs that barely held him. Rosalind sat propped against pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blue blanket Clara had made 4 years ago for a child who never came. Her name is Clara Rose. Rosalind looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Clara, for your wife, who made this blanket and who wanted you to love again. Rose, for my mother, who died when I was small. Silas knelt beside the bed, looking at the smallest, most perfect human being he had ever seen. Dark hair like Rosalind's, a tiny rosebud mouth that moved constantly, seeking. Fingers so impossibly small, they seemed like a miracle of creation. May I? Rosalind placed the baby in his arms, showing him how to support her head, how to hold her safely. Clara Rose felt weightless and infinitely precious, this new life that he had helped bring into the world. Hello, Clara Rose. His voice came out rough with emotion. I am Silas. I am going to keep you safe. You and your mother both. For as long as I live, I promise you that. The baby's eyes opened, unfocused, newborn blue, but they seemed to find his face and settle there. One tiny hand escaped the blanket and wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Silas felt Clara watching. He felt her approval, her blessing, her joy that her last wish was being fulfilled. The love she had poured into that blue blanket was finally warming a child, just as she had wanted. And Silas knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that he had finally found his way home. Spring came reluctantly to the mountains that year. April brought bitter winds and late snow, keeping travel difficult and movement dangerous. But by the middle of the month, the trails began to open, and with them came the inevitable confrontation that Silas had been preparing for. He was standing at the window of their room, watching the morning sun paint the distant peaks gold, when Marcus burst through the door. "Riders coming. 5 of them. One matches the description you gave me of Walter Mercer. And Stone? With them. How long? 20 minutes. Maybe less." Silas turned to find Rosalind already rising from the bed. Clara rose, asleep in the cradle beside her. Her face was pale but determined. "What do we do?" "We face them." Silas picked up his rifle. Together. The confrontation took place in the main yard of the trading post. Silas stood flanked by Marcus and 2 of his hired men, all armed and ready. Behind them, Rosalind emerged from the building with Clara Rose in her arms, Edith hovering protectively at her side. Walter Mercer dismounted first. He was an imposing figure, despite his age. 62 years old, with hair gone completely white and eyes that burned with cold fury. His clothes were expensive, his bearing aristocratic, but there was something broken beneath the surface. Something grief had twisted into obsession. Jedediah Stone and 3 armed men fanned out behind him, hands on their weapons, ready for violence. "Rosalind." Walter spoke her name like a curse. "You survived. I should have made sure of it myself instead of trusting the mountain to do my work. You pushed a pregnant woman off a cliff to die." Rosalind's voice was steady despite the fear visible in her eyes. "Your own daughter-in-law, the mother of your grandchild. You murdered my son. I gave your son the peace he begged for. The peace you were too cowardly to grant him yourself." Walter's face contorted with rage. "Lies. You poisoned him for his land, for the property that should have stayed in my family." Silas stepped forward, positioning himself between Walter and Rosalind. "That is far enough." Walter's eyes moved to him, assessing, dismissing. "And who are you? Another victim of her manipulations? I am the man who found her broken at the bottom of that ravine, the man who saved her life and delivered her daughter, the man who will put a bullet in you if you take another step toward them." Stone cleared his throat. "This is very touching, but perhaps we can dispense with the threats. There is still the matter of $500. He nodded toward Silas. "Silas Crenshaw, wanted for triple murder. That reward belongs to whoever brings him in. Those men killed my pregnant wife, and you killed them. Justice or vengeance. The law does not distinguish between them. Dead is dead, and $500 is $500. Stone paused, a cruel smile twisting his scarred face. "But there is something more interesting that I discovered in my research. Something that makes the story much more complicated." He turned to Walter. "You see, Judge Mercer, one of the 3 men Crenshaw killed, was named Henry Crenshaw, his younger brother." Silas felt the blood drain from his face. Stone continued, clearly enjoying the revelation. "That is right. Our heroic mountain man did not just kill the men who murdered his wife. He killed his own brother, beat him to death with his bare hands, from what the witnesses said. So you see, we are all just murderers here, one way or another." Walter stared at Silas with new contempt. "You killed your own blood. And you presume to judge me? My brother helped murder my pregnant wife. He laughed about it when I confronted him. Called her just a woman, said I could find another." Silas's voice was cold. "Yes, I killed him. I beat him until he stopped laughing, stopped breathing, stopped existing, and I would do it again without hesitation. Because some betrayals cannot be forgiven. Some crimes demand a reckoning." He met Walter's eyes. "But I never pushed a pregnant woman off a cliff. I never tried to murder an innocent child before it was even born. Whatever I am, whatever I have done, I never did that." Silence fell over the yard. Even Stone seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Then Clara Rose began to cry. The sound cut through the tension like a knife. Rosalind tried to soothe her, bouncing gently, murmuring comfort, but the baby continued to wail. And something in that cry, that helpless newborn sound, seemed to reach Walter in a way that words had not. His eyes fixed on the bundle in Rosalind's arms. "My grandchild." His voice was different now, softer, almost broken. "Tobias's daughter. Her name is Clara Rose." Rosalind stepped forward despite Silas's attempt to stop her. Clara for Silas's first wife, who made the blanket she is wrapped in. Rose for my mother. Walter flinched at the names, at the reminder that this child's life was already woven together with people who had nothing to do with him. Rosalind continued speaking, her voice gentler now. Walter, I know you are grieving. I know you loved Tobias. I loved him too, more than I can ever explain. And when he was dying, when every breath was agony, when he begged me every day to help him escape the pain, her voice broke. I did what he asked, not because I wanted to, not because I stood to gain anything from his death, but because I loved him too much to watch him suffer any longer. Walter's face twisted. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to remember your son. The real Tobias, not the version grief has created in your mind. Was he the kind of man who would beg for death? Was he the kind of man who would ask his wife to help him find peace? She stepped closer. You know he was. You know how proud he was, how much he hated weakness, how he never wanted to be a burden to anyone. The disease was destroying everything he valued about himself. And in the end, the only control he had left was the choice to end it. Clara Rose's crying had subsided to whimpers. Her tiny hand escaped the blanket and reached toward nothing, fingers grasping at air. Walter stared at that hand, transfixed. She has his fingers. His voice was barely audible. Tobias used to do that when he was a baby, always reaching for something just out of grasp. Yes, Rosalind moved even closer. She has his eyes too, I think, and his stubbornness. She refuses to sleep when she is supposed to, just like he did. Walter's control finally broke. Tears spilled down his weathered face. 4 months of grief and rage finding release in that moment. He asked you. He really asked you to do it. Every day for a month, and every night I held him while he cried from the pain. I watched the man I loved disappear piece by piece until all that was left was suffering. She was crying too now. I did not want to do it, Walter. I wanted him to live. I wanted our child to know her father. But sometimes love means letting go, even when letting go destroys us. Walter stood frozen, his face a battlefield of emotions. Grief warred with anger, love with betrayal, the desire for vengeance with the undeniable evidence of his granddaughter in Rosalind's arms. May I see her? His voice was barely a whisper. Rosalind hesitated, then stepped forward and angled Clara Rose so Walter could see her face. The baby had stopped crying, her unfocused eyes roaming the new face above her. Walter reached out with one trembling hand, then stopped himself. May I touch her? Yes. Walter's weathered finger gently stroked Clara Rose's cheek. The baby turned toward the touch instinctively, that seeking reflex all newborns share. And then, impossibly, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger and held on. Walter made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She grips like Tobias did. He always held on tight, even at the end. He looked at Rosalind with something that was not quite forgiveness, but was no longer rage. I am not ready to forgive you. I do not know if I ever will be. But he looked down at Clara Rose again, at the tiny face that held echoes of his dead son. I cannot hurt her. I cannot take her from the only mother she has ever known. I came here prepared to do terrible things. But looking at her now, he shook his head. Tobias would never forgive me if I orphaned his daughter. He stepped back, releasing Clara Rose's grip on his finger. Go, wherever you want. I will not follow. He turned to Stone. Pay them what they are owed. We are leaving. Stone's face showed surprise, then calculation. But Judge Mercer, the $500 reward. Crenshaw is a matter for the territorial authorities to deal with. Not us. Not today. Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder, which he handed to Rosalind. The land claim papers. 320 acres in Oregon Territory. They belong to Tobias, which means they belong to you now. And he hesitated. A sworn statement that I make no legal claim against you regarding my son's death, that I believe he died of natural causes, and that you are free to go wherever you wish. Rosalind took the papers with trembling hands. Walter, tell her about Tobias when she is old enough to understand. Tell her that her father was a good man who loved her mother very much. Tell her that her grandfather was a fool who almost destroyed everything. He mounted his horse, gesturing for Stone and the others to follow. Tell her I loved him too, even if I did not know how to show it. He rode away without looking back. The yard was silent for a long moment after they disappeared over the ridge. Then Silas crossed to Rosalind and pulled her and Clara Rose into his arms. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "You are free, both of you. All three of us." Rosalind looked up at him. "We are all free now." Epilogue. 5 years later. The valley was everything Silas had dreamed of. They had traveled north after leaving Thornton's post, following Marcus's carefully drawn maps into the wilderness of British Columbia. The land here was wild and empty, untouched by civilization, exactly the sanctuary they needed. Silas built their cabin overlooking a meadow that exploded with wildflowers each spring. A clear stream ran nearby, full of fish that practically jumped onto the hook. The mountains rose on every side, protective barriers against the world they had left behind. Clara Rose was 5 now, tall for her age with Rosalind's dark hair and a fierce determination that reminded Silas of both the women who had shaped his life. She could already identify animal tracks and knew which berries were safe to eat. She called him Papa with such easy certainty that sometimes he forgot she had not come from his own body. James Silas was 3, named for Silas's father, a wild boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to track and fish and survive in the wilderness that was his birthplace. And Molly, named for Clara's mother, who had died when Clara was young, was just 18 months old. She slept now in the cradle Silas had built all those years ago, the blue blanket still covering her small form. Silas stood on the cabin porch, watching the children play in the meadow, while Rosalind prepared dinner inside. The evening sun painted everything gold, and the peace of the moment settled into his bones like a blessing. Marcus's latest letter sat on the table inside. It had arrived with the annual supply wagon, bringing news from a world that seemed impossibly distant. The territorial governor had signed a general amnesty. Anyone wanted for crimes committed more than 5 years ago in frontier disputes was pardoned. Silas Crenshaw was no longer a wanted man, and Walter Mercer had died last fall, peacefully in his sleep. He had left instructions that a portion of his estate be set aside for Clara Rose, held in trust until she reached adulthood. In the end, Silas thought, even Walter had found a way to let go. Rosalind appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner is almost ready. I will gather the children." He started toward the meadow, then paused and looked back at her. This woman who had fallen into his life like a gift he did not deserve. This family he had built from the ashes of everything he had lost. "Rosalind." "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me. For letting me find myself again." She smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart on a frozen mountainside 5 years ago. "We found each other. That is what matters." Clara Rose came running across the meadow, her brother James stumbling behind her. "Papa, Papa, I found a deer track. Come see." Silas lifted his daughter into his arms, her small hands wrapping around his neck with that familiar fierce grip. "Show me." Later after dinner, after the children were asleep, Silas and Rosalind sat on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one. "Do you ever think about going back?" Rosalind asked. "To Wyoming? To civilization?" Silas considered the question. "Sometimes, I wonder what it would be like to walk down a street without looking over my shoulder. To introduce our children to other children. To live without this constant sense of hiding." He reached over and took her hand, the gold ring warm against his fingers. "But then I look at this valley, at our home, at the life we have built together, and I cannot imagine wanting anything else. Marcus said in his letter that you could go back now. The amnesty covers everything." "I could." Silas nodded. "But going back would mean leaving this, and I do not think I could bear that." Rosalind leaned her head against his shoulder. "Clara Rose asked me about her real father today. What did you tell her?" "The truth. That Tobias was a good man who loved me very much. That he died before she was born, but that he would have adored her if he had lived. And that you are her father now, in every way that matters." "How did she take it?" She thought about it for a while. Then she said that she was lucky because she has two fathers instead of one. One who gave her life and one who saved it. Silas felt tears prick at his eyes. She is remarkable. She is yours. Ours. That is all that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called to its mate, and another answered. Silas thought about the blood on the snow that had started everything, the broken woman he had found at the bottom of a ravine, the impossible choice to save a stranger when everything in him screamed to stay alone. He thought about Clara, about her letter, about her final wish that he would love again. He thought about the family sleeping inside the cabin he had built, three children who called him father, a woman who had given him back his life, and he thought about the long journey from grief to healing, from isolation to connection, from simply surviving to truly living. The blood on the snow had led him here, to this valley, to this family, to this moment of perfect peace. It was exactly where he was meant to be. The end.